Blood-curdling screams echoed through Manhattan's most exclusive dining room, shattering crystal glasses and terrifying billionaires. A ruthless Italian conglomerate CEO was writhing on the marble floor, dying. Paramedics were seconds away from making a fatal mistake. Only a 24-year-old waitress knew the terrifying truth, and she had to fight to save him. Neon lights from the Tribeca streets bled through the frosted windows of Osteria del Sole, casting long, distorted shadows across the imported Tuscan marble floors. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was an arena where Manhattan's elite came to flex their portfolios over $800 bottles of vintage Barolo. For 24-year-old Chloe Anderson, it was merely a survival mechanism. Just a year ago, Chloe had been in her third year at the NYU Rory Myers College of Nursing, pulling 4.0 GPAs and dreaming of working in emergency trauma. But life has a cruel sense of humor. When her mother's lupus aggressively flared up, requiring experimental treatments at Mount Sinai Hospital that insurance flatly refused to cover, the $80,000 mountain of student debt became an insurmountable wall. Chloe traded her dark blue scrubs for the crisp white blouse and black apron of a high-end server. She still had the sharp diagnostic mind of a top-tier nursing student, but tonight her only job was to ensure the truffles were shaved thinly enough for people who made more in an hour than she did in a decade. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted dramatically at exactly 8:15 p.m. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and the maître d' Mr. Beaumont practically tripped over his own polished shoes to greet the arrivals. Walking through the doors was Alessandro De Luca. At 38, Alessandro was the formidable CEO of De Luca Holdings, a massive Italian luxury textile and real estate conglomerate based in Milan, but aggressively expanding into the American market. He was notoriously private, ruthlessly efficient, and featured on the cover of Forbes more often than most celebrities. Tonight, Alessandro was not alone. He was flanked by his chief operating officer, Dominic Rossi, a man with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes, and a high-profile corporate attorney named Samantha. Table 7. Chloe, Mr. Beaumont hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind the service station. That is the De Luca party. They are closing a multi-billion-dollar merger tomorrow morning. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not linger. If his water glass drops below half full, consider yourself fired. Understand. Understood, Mr. Beaumont. Chloe replied, her voice steady, though she felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Approaching table 7, Chloe immediately sensed the suffocating tension. Alessandro sat rigidly in the plush leather booth. Despite the impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders, he looked off. As a former nursing student, Chloe's eyes naturally drifted to clinical signs before social cues. Alessandro was pale, an unnatural ashen grey, beneath his Mediterranean olive skin. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle fluttered erratically near his ear. As he reached for the wine list, Chloe noticed a fine, high-frequency tremor in his fingers and a light sheen of diaphoresis sweating on his upper lip, despite the restaurant's aggressively cool air conditioning. "Good evening. Welcome to Osteria del Sole." Chloe began, smoothly keeping her tone professionally detached. "May I start you with some sparkling water? Or, just pour the Pellegrino, skip the specials," Dominic interrupted smoothly, waving a dismissive hand without looking up from his smartphone. "Alessandro, you need to sign the preliminary disclosures tonight. If the board finds out about the delayed restructuring, they'll panic." Alessandro didn't look at Dominic. He kept his eyes fixed on the tablecloth, his breathing shallow. "I will sign them when I am ready, Dominic. Stop hovering like a vulture." His voice was deep, accented, and strained. He briefly brought a hand to his abdomen, pressing 2 fingers just below his ribs before quickly hiding the gesture. Chloe poured the water, her mind racing. Guarding his abdomen. Diaphoresis. Tremors. It looked like acute abdominal distress. Appendicitis. A bleeding peptic ulcer. Gallbladder attack, she took their orders. A simple branzino for Alessandro. Osso. Bucco for Dominic, and retreated to the kitchen. As the dinner progressed over the next 40 minutes, Chloe watched the table like a hawk. Alessandro barely touched his fish. He was drinking excessive amounts of water. Meanwhile, Dominic was practically vibrating, with a strange nervous energy, constantly pushing a leather portfolio toward his boss. When Chloe returned to clear the appetizer plates, she overheard a chilling fragment of conversation. Blood pressure medication? Alessandro. Dominic was saying his voice, a low, soothing purr that sounded distinctly lethal. You took the new one I picked up for you from the pharmacy, right? The doctor said it would help with the stress of the merger. Alessandro just grunted, wiping his brow with a linen napkin. It is making me nauseous. My stomach. It feels like it is burning. Chloe backed away silently. Blood pressure medication, new nausea, and severe abdominal pain. Her medical training filed the symptoms away, building a differential diagnosis in the back of her mind. She had no idea that in less than 10 minutes, the entire restaurant would descend into absolute chaos, and those small clinical observations would be the only thing standing between Alessandro De Luca and the city morgue. The explosion of violence was completely silent at first. Chloe was pouring a fresh glass of Barolo for a prominent judge at table 4, when a horrifying sound ripped through the low hum of the restaurant. It wasn't a gasp. It was a guttural, agonizing scream. Crash. Alessandro De Luca violently knocked his heavy oak chair backward. He collapsed onto the Tuscan marble floor, taking the entire table setting with him. A heavy crystal vase shattered into hundreds of pieces, scattering white orchids and freezing water everywhere. Alessandro? Samantha screamed, jumping back as red wine stained her silk dress. The entire dining room froze. The gentle piano music abruptly stopped. Chloe dropped her serving towel and sprinted toward table 7 instincts, from her clinical rotations overriding Mr. Beaumont's strict rules about decorum. Alessandro was writhing on the ground, his knees pulled tightly to his chest in a fetal position. His hands clawed desperately at his stomach. The pain must have been astronomical. He was a man known for his stoic, unbreakable demeanor, yet he was crying out tears of pure agony streaming down his face. "Somebody call 911, Dominic yelled, dropping to his knees beside the CEO. "He's having a heart attack. He's dying." Chloe slid onto the wet marble, her black skirt soaking up spilled wine and water. Sir, can you hear me?" she shouted, checking his airway. "Move aside, waitress." A booming voice echoed. A man in his late 50s wearing a tweed blazer pushed through the panicked crowd. "I'm a physician, Dr. Harrison, Mount Sinai Cardiology. Give me room." Chloe reluctantly backed up a few inches, allowing the doctor to kneel. Dr. Harrison immediately grabbed Alessandro's wrist to check his pulse. "Rapid and thready. He's tachycardic." "Sir, do you have chest pain?" Alessandro couldn't answer. He was gasping for air, but strangely, his hands weren't on his chest. They were still desperately crushing his own abdomen. Suddenly, Chloe noticed a terrifying shift. Alessandro's face, previously pale, was beginning to distend. His upper lip was swelling rapidly, puffing out with alarming speed. His eyelids were becoming puffy fluid, filling the tissues under the skin. "He's having an allergic reaction," Dominic suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "The fish! There must have been cross-contamination with shellfish. He's deadly allergic to shellfish." Dr. Harrison's eyes widened as he saw the facial swelling. Anaphylaxis. The airway is going to close. Does anyone have an EpiPen? I have one in my purse. A wealthy socialite from table 2 shrieked, digging frantically into her Chanel bag. She sprinted over, tossing the bright yellow auto-injector to the doctor. Doctor? Harrison uncapped the EpiPen and raised his fist, preparing to plunge it into Alessandro's thigh. Chloe's brain was firing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Wait. She looked at Alessandro. Facial swelling. Severe, agonizing abdominal pain. Tachycardia. But something was missing. Where are the hives, Chloe thought, frantically. Anaphylaxis, severe enough to cause sudden facial swelling and collapse, almost always presents with urticaria, massive, red, itchy hives across the neck and chest. Alessandro's skin was clear. What about the wheezing? His breathing was strained because of the pain, but there was no high-pitched stridor, no wheezing in the lungs characteristic of an asthma-like histamine reaction. And the abdominal pain anaphylaxis can cause stomach cramps, but not pain so severe that a grown man is screaming in a fetal position like his appendix burst. Then Chloe remembered the conversation she overheard. Dominic gave him a new blood pressure medication. A specific lecture from her advanced pathophysiology class slammed into her mind like a freight train. ACE inhibitors, a common class of blood pressure medications. In extremely rare cases, or in patients with a specific genetic defect, ACE inhibitors trigger a massive, localized overproduction of a peptide called bradykinin. It wasn't a histamine reaction. It was hereditary angioedema, HAE, or a severe drug-induced angioedema. The bradykinin was causing fluid to leak rapidly from his blood vessels into his tissues. His intestines were swelling so massively that they were effectively strangling themselves, hence the excruciating abdominal pain. And now the swelling was moving to his face and airway. "Doctor, stop!" Chloe lunged forward, grabbing Dr. Harrison's wrist just inches before the EpiPen pierced Alessandro's thigh. The entire restaurant gasped. Mr. Beaumont looked like he was going to faint. "Chloe, have you lost your mind? Let the doctor work. Epinephrine won't work." Chloe screamed, her grip like a vice on the doctor's arm. "Look at him. No hives. No wheezing. It's not a histamine reaction. It's a bradykinin storm. He's having an angioedema attack, likely triggered by an ACA inhibitor. If you give him epinephrine, you'll spike his heart rate and blood pressure, but it won't touch the swelling. His airway will still close." "Doctor," Harrison stared at her, utterly stunned by the aggressive, highly technical medical jargon coming out of a waitress covered in spilled wine. "What are you talking about? He's in anaphylaxis." "Dominic said he started a new blood pressure pill today," Chloe yelled, turning to the COO. "Was it lisinopril enalapril, an ACE inhibitor?" Dominic's face drained of color. He looked genuinely terrified, but beneath that terror, Chloe saw a flash of raw, unfiltered guilt. I don't know the name. The pharmacy gave it to me. He told me he was allergic to shellfish." "He's lying or mistaken," Chloe snapped. She leaned over Alessandro, whose face was now grotesquely swollen, his lips doubling in size. She ripped open the top buttons of his $2,000 shirt. There, resting against his chest, was a heavy silver medical alert dog tag. Chloe flipped it over. Engraved in deep black letters were the words HAE Type 1. No EPI. Icatibant only. Hereditary angioedema toward her. "Doctor," Harrison whispered, the color draining from his face as he lowered the EpiPen. "My God. You're right. Epinephrine won't stop the bradykinin, but paramedics are 5 minutes away. If we don't reverse this, his trachea will swell shut in less than 3 minutes. I don't have intubation gear. Alessandro's lips parted, letting out a horrific whistling gasp. His airway was closing. He was suffocating. His medication, Chloe demanded, looking wildly at the scattered belongings. People with severe HAE always carried rescue medication, a bradykinin receptor antagonist, called Firazyr icatibant. Where is his briefcase? In the coat room, Samantha cried out, pointing toward the front of the restaurant. Chloe didn't wait. She kicked off her sensible black work shoes and sprinted across the marble floor in her bare feet, desperate to beat the ticking clock in Alessandro's throat. Adrenaline flooded Chloe's system entirely, muting the sharp pain of the cold marble against her bare feet as she sprinted toward the mahogany-paneled coat room at the front of the restaurant. Behind her, the sounds of a five-star dining experience had been replaced by a chorus of panicked murmurs, breaking glass, and the horrifying wet gasps of a man slowly strangling to death from the inside out. She burst into the coat room, her eyes wildly scanning the racks of cashmere overcoats and silk scarves. "Briefcase! Briefcase! Briefcase!" she muttered frantically. There, sitting on the bottom shelf, was a sleek, black, baluti leather attaché case. Chloe dropped to her knees, her trembling fingers grabbing the brass latches. She pushed them, expecting the satisfying click of a release. Nothing happened. It was locked with a 3-digit combination dial. "Damn it!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking. She had less than 2 minutes before Alessandro's trachea completely closed, starving his brain of oxygen and causing irreversible damage, if not death. She couldn't guess the combination. She needed a tool. Scanning the coat attendant's desk, her eyes landed on a heavy, solid bronze bookend, shaped like a galloping horse. Without a second thought, Chloe grabbed the heavy bronze statue, raised it high above her head, and brought it crashing down onto the brass lock. Crack! The metal dented, but held. "Break, you stupid thing!" she yelled, swinging the bronze horse down a second time with every ounce of strength her exhausted 24-year-old body could muster. The brass shattered, sending tiny shards of metal flying across the carpet. Chloe ripped the leather case open. Inside, meticulously organized, were stacks of financial documents, a maroon Italian passport, and a bright white, sterile rectangular box. Firazyr icatibant injection, 30 milligrams. Chloe snatched the box, abandoning the ruined briefcase, and sprinted back out into the dining room. The scene at table 7 had deteriorated rapidly. Dr. Harrison was kneeling helplessly beside Alessandro, checking his watch, his face pale. Alessandro's skin had shifted from ashen grey to a terrifying shade of cyanotic blue. His lips were monstrously swollen, and his eyes were completely swollen shut. His hands, previously clutching his stomach, were now desperately clawing at his own throat in a primal panic. "I have it!" Chloe yelled, skidding onto the wine-soaked marble and ripping open the cardboard packaging. Inside was a pre-filled glass syringe with a short, thick needle. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on her wrist like a vice. It was Dominic. "What do you think you are doing?" The chief operating officer hissed, his grip bruising her skin. "You are a waitress. You are not authorized to inject him with an unknown substance. You'll be sued for practicing medicine without a license. Wait for the paramedics." Chloe looked up directly into Dominic's eyes. Earlier she had seen panic. Now, stripped of the initial chaos, she saw something entirely different. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, desperate calculation. He was actively trying to stall. Then the final puzzle piece locked into place in Chloe's clinically trained mind. An unknown substance. Chloe's voice dropped to a dangerous, steady whisper. "It's his life-saving medication. The medication he needs because he has hereditary angioedema, a condition that is triggered by extreme stress or—" She yanked her arm, trying to break his grip, but he was too strong. Or by taking ACE inhibitors. Chloe continued, her voice rising so the surrounding tables could hear. You gave him a new blood pressure pill today. You told the doctor it was for the stress of the merger. But you knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you? Dominic lisinopril is an absolute fatal contraindication for a patient with HAE. It blocks the enzyme that breaks down bradykinin. You weaponized his own genetics against him. Dominic's face drained of color. The calculating mask slipped, revealing naked terror. You're insane. Security. Get this crazy woman away from him. Let her go. Dr. Harrison, the 60-year-old cardiologist from Mount Sinai, suddenly lunged forward, throwing his full body weight against Dominic. The unexpected shove broke Dominic's grip on Chloe and sent the executive stumbling backward into a nearby table, scattering silverware. Do it now, Doctor. Harrison yelled to Chloe, physically placing himself between Dominic and the dying CEO. Chloe didn't hesitate. She popped the plastic cap off the syringe. Firazyr had to be injected subcutaneously into the fatty tissue just beneath the skin, usually in the abdominal area. She pulled back Alessandro's torn $2,000 shirt, exposing his stomach. She pinched a 2-inch fold of skin just above his navel, angled the needle at 45 degrees, and pushed it deep into the tissue. Her thumb depressed the plunger, steadily delivering the full 3 milliliters of the thick bradykinin receptor antagonist fluid. She pulled the needle out, dropping it safely onto a napkin, and immediately placed both of her hands on Alessandro's cheeks. Come on, she whispered, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. Come on, Mr. DeLuca. Breathe. Fight. The restaurant was dead silent, save for the distant approaching wail of FDNY sirens echoing off the skyscrapers of Tribeca. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. To Chloe it felt like an eternity. With anaphylaxis, epinephrine acts almost instantly to constrict blood vessels and open airways. But icatibant works differently. It has to bind to the receptors, physically blocking the body's overproduction of the swelling agent. It wasn't magic. It took time. Time that Alessandro barely had. Just as the red and white flashing lights of the ambulance illuminated the frosted windows of Osteria del Sole, Alessandro's chest gave a massive, violent shudder. His jaw cracked open. A horrifying, high-pitched whistling sound echoed through the room, but it was air. Air was moving. The massive swelling in his mucous membranes had halted, and just enough inflammation had subsided to create a millimeter of space in his trachea. He drew in a ragged, desperate breath, coughing violently as oxygen finally rushed back into his starved lungs. The terrifying blue tint of his skin slowly began to recede, replaced by a flushed, exhausted pink. The heavy mahogany doors flew open, and 3 paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and heavy trauma bags. "What do we have?" the lead paramedic shouted. Dr. Harrison stepped back, pointing directly at the waitress kneeling in the spilled wine. "Severe hereditary angioedema attack. Grade 4 airway compromise. 30 milligrams of icatibant administered subcutaneously 1 minute ago. She saved his life." The next 48 hours were a blur of absolute chaos for Chloe Anderson. When the police arrived at the restaurant to take statements, Dominic attempted to quietly slip out the back exit near the kitchens. He didn't make it. Chloe had immediately informed the officers of the deliberate medication switch and doctor. Harrison corroborated the medical impossibility of it being an accident. Dominic was detained for questioning regarding criminal negligence and attempted corporate sabotage. However, Chloe's heroism did not shield her from the brutal realities of the service industry. The next morning she received a terse 2-line email from Mr. Beaumont, the maitre d'. She was officially terminated for gross unprofessionalism, violating the restaurant's code of conduct, and destroying a guest's private property. 2 days later, Chloe sat on the faded floral sofa in her mother's cramped second-story apartment in Queens. The air smelled of cheap chicken broth and the antiseptic wipes her mother used for her port line. Her mother was sleeping in the other room, exhausted from a recent flare-up. Chloe stared blankly at her phone, calculating how long her remaining savings would last. Maybe a month. She had lost her job. She couldn't afford her mother's next round of experimental therapies at Mount Sinai, and NYU was a ghost of a dream. A sharp knock at the door broke her bleak reverie. Chloe opened it to find a stunning woman in a sharp grey Prada suit. It was Samantha, the corporate attorney, who had been dining with Alessandro De Luca. Behind her, parked illegally on the narrow Queens street, was an idling black armoured Maybach. "Miss Anderson," Samantha said, her tone professional, but laced with genuine warmth. "Mr. De Luca is requesting your presence." I can't afford a lawsuit over the broken briefcase," Chloe stammered, instantly defensive. Samantha offered a rare, genuine smile. "I assure you, Miss Anderson, Mr. De Luca has no intention of suing you. Please come with me." An hour later, Chloe was escorted into the ultra-exclusive VIP recovery wing of Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. Security guards flanked the heavy oak door. Inside the room looked more like a penthouse suite than a hospital room. Alessandro De Luca was sitting up in a massive adjustable bed. The swelling in his face was completely gone, revealing his sharp, aristocratic features. He looked exhausted, but the dangerous, commanding aura of the billionaire CEO had fully returned. As Chloe entered, Alessandro set down his tablet. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her, his dark eyes analyzing the young woman in the oversized sweater and faded jeans who had physically wrestled death away from him. "The police searched Dominic's penthouse yesterday." Alessandro began, his voice still slightly raspy from the airway trauma. "They found a secondary encrypted laptop. Dominic had leveraged offshore accounts to heavily short the stock of De Luca Holdings. If I had died before the merger was finalized yesterday morning, the deal would have collapsed. Our stock would have plummeted. Dominic stood to make nearly $400 million. Chloe felt a chill run down her spine. He really tried to murder you for money. He exploited a medical vulnerability that only 3 people in the world knew about, Alessandro corrected quietly. He assumed the paramedics would treat it as a standard allergic reaction. By the time they realized the epinephrine wasn't working, I would have suffocated. It was a perfect, untraceable assassination. Except he didn't account for a waitress who knew more about pharmacology than a Manhattan cardiologist. Alessandro shifted, slightly wincing as he moved. He picked up a thick leather-bound folder from his bedside table and held it out. Samantha stepped forward, took the folder and handed it to Chloe. "Open it," Alessandro instructed. Chloe opened the folder. Inside were 2 documents. "I run a global empire, Miss Anderson," Alessandro said, his tone turning fiercely businesslike. "I do not believe in debts, and I certainly do not leave debts unpaid to those who save my life. I had my team look into your background." Chloe scanned the first document. It was a formal letterhead from Mount Sinai's immunology department. "I discovered why a brilliant nursing student dropped out of NYU." Alessandro continued gently. "Your mother's lupus treatments. The hospital received a $2 million anonymous grant this morning, strictly earmarked for the experimental trial ward. Your mother has been moved to the top of the priority list. Her entire treatment program is fully funded for the next 10 years. Chloe gasped, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the folder. Tears, hot and heavy, instantly blurred her vision. "Mr. De Luca, this is—" "Turn the page," he commanded softly. Chloe flipped to the second document. It was an official receipt from New York University, stamped paid in full, alongside a sleek corporate employment contract. Your student debt is gone. Your tuition for your final year is paid, Alessandro stated. Furthermore, DeLuca Holdings is finalizing our American expansion. We are building a massive corporate wellness and occupational health division in our new Manhattan headquarters. The contract in your hand guarantees you the position of Director of Medical Operations the moment you pass your nursing boards. Your starting salary will be roughly 20 times what you made serving wine. Chloe couldn't speak. She collapsed into a plush chair near the window, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The crushing weight that had suffocated her for the past year, the fear, the poverty, the dread of losing her mother, evaporated in an instant. Alessandro watched her, a soft smile breaking through his normally stoic expression. He looked at Samantha, who was discreetly wiping her own eyes. "You broke my favorite briefcase, Chloe." Alessandro said, his voice laced with a deep, rumbling warmth. "But considering what you unpacked from it, I suppose I can forgive the property damage." Months later, Chloe walked across the stage at Madison Square Garden, her dark blue NYU graduation gown flowing behind her. As she accepted her nursing degree with highest honors, she looked out into the VIP section of the crowd. There, sitting alongside her mother, who was glowing with health and vitality, was Alessandro DeLuca. He gave a sharp, respectful nod. Chloe smiled back, knowing that the worst night of her life had ultimately become the exact prescription she needed to save her mother, her career, and herself. Did Chloe's quick thinking leave you speechless? What would you have done in that terrifying situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you love true stories of medical mysteries, shocking betrayals, and everyday heroes getting the justice they deserve, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this incredible story with your friends and hit subscribe so you never miss another heart-stopping video. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.